Good morning, 7th grade, and welcome to lesson 15 of Across 5 Aprils by our novel by Irene Hunt. We are going to break this chapter into 3 sections. I'm hopeful that we can do each of those in about a 20-minute lesson. It's a little bit of a longer chapter, so with that being said, when we take a look at the questions, I'm going to share those with you right now. We are only going to focus on the first 3 questions. So we see over here, chapter 9, question 1, what was going on at Point Prospect? 2, why did the federal registrars visit the Crichton's farm? And 3, what was Jenny's reaction to the registrars? So one thing I'm going to do differently this time is I've decided that I'm not going to put the book up on the screen. I have my book handy here, and I'm going to read to you from it. And I would like you to get your book out and follow along with me, please. So we are, chapter 9 starts on page 128. Please turn to page 128. The deserters came in droves. So remember at the end of chapter 8, the deserters are the soldiers who are leaving the army. They don't want to fight anymore. Now this is very different from our soldiers nowadays. So our soldiers are allowed to go on certain leaves, when they're overseas. They're there for several months at a time, but we realize that this is very difficult on those soldiers, and they will have the units kind of rotate so that they're not there too long. And then sometimes they do have to go back. However, during the Civil War, once they were in, they were in. So if we keep in mind that this war has already gone on for over 1.5 years, it is a very long time to be fighting and to be without a break. So that's part of the desertion. The Point Prospect Campground south of Rose Hill was said to be swarming with soldiers who made forays on chicken coops, pig pens, and smokehouses where winter meat was hung. In the spring and summer, vegetable gardens, cornfields, and fruit orchards were robbed. No one dared to approach the camp. Even the U.S. agents from the cities upstate appeared to be in no hurry to visit. It was known that the deserters carried their arms and that they were desperate. So their arms would be their guns, and that they're desperate to not have to go back, so they're going to fight. For a neighbor to have recognized a face among them might well have been sufficient reason for getting a bullet between the eyes. These men meant to take no chances with an informer. So what is it that's going on at Point Prospect Campground? This is where the deserters are going. And in order to survive, they're unfortunately stealing food, and it's pretty bad. The stories varied. Some said there were 100 men at Point Prospect. Others put the number at nearer 500. In the early months of '63, the theft of food was their only crime against the community. By March, however, a killing took place. There was a man known as Phillips down in the southern part of the country, and the story came out that he had hired a substitute to go to war for him. That in itself was not uncommon. Many others in the country had taken advantage of this method of dodging the draft, which in the spring of '63 included men from 20 up to the age of 45. $300 was all it took. That was a lot of money. But once the substitute was found and the $300 paid, a man could sit back comfortably and yawn at the war news if he chose. There were men who were forced to take advantage of this system of substitute hiring because of serious illness in the home or the dependency of motherless children. There was, however, no reason why Phillips should have avoided the draft, except that he was a lazy bachelor, much favored by his mother, that he was fond of good food and a comfortable bed, and had been known to adhere to the opinion that fools could do the fighting, while men of intelligence and property might take pleasure in the prospect of a long and easy life. Hardly at all, that is, until one moonless night, a band of young men visited him, men who knew what gangrenous wounds were like, what marches through cold rain or blistering heat meant. while hunger gnawed at their stomachs, or weakness from typhus or dysentery brought agony to every step. Men who had seen the dead piled high on smoking battlefields and had come to believe that the soldier of 2 years had done his share, that the burden should now fall upon others' shoulders. So gangrenous is one of our vocabulary words, but I don't know if you've come across it yet. But basically it's like they become infected and green and kind of gross. And that's going to actually come up later on in the book and be somewhat important. I apologize if there was a disruption between those paragraphs. I did have to pause the video as I spoke with my children. So I want to talk about that Hig Phillips just for a second. He's, no wife or children, as being the bachelor, still lives at home with mom, but because he has all this money, he's like, oh, somebody lesser than me can go fight. And obviously these men who've been fighting for almost 2 years are like, we've had enough. Somebody like this should pay. So back on page 129. Although there were many who held Hig Phillips in contempt, meaning they hate him, his murder was an act of lawlessness that terrorized the county. People realized that anything could be expected from a mob of undisciplined desperados. Nancy, who had thought of going back to her own place the following summer, now heeded Ellen's advice and closed her house completely, bringing her stock up to Matt's new barn and keeping her children in the comparative safety of their grandfather's home. Jenny was no longer allowed to drive alone to Hidalgo for the mail. No one ventured far away from home after nightfall, and as in the days of the workman trouble the year before, no one ever went to bed with the full confidence of security. The fury of the abolitionists and the Copperheads was now taken over by the deserters. One night in February of '63, as the family sat around the open fire, a wagon clattered down the road from the north and stopped in front of the house. Opening the door, Jethro saw 3 young men jump down from the wagon and stride up to the porch. "Is this the home of Matthew Crichton?" one of them asked. Jethro noticed the crispness of the voice, an upstate voice, he thought. "Yes, sir. My father's right here. Will you come indoors?" They came inside with a great clatter of heavy boots. Jenny stood wide-eyed beside her father's chair. Nancy and Ellen held the small boys tightly in their arms. Matt tried to rise. "Stay seated, sir. We're here to ask you a few questions." The young man who spoke threw his coat to show his uniform and insignia. "We are representatives of the federal registrars. We are charged with hunting down deserters from the United States Army." "Will you take chairs, gentlemen?" Matt said evenly, but Jethro noticed the sudden paleness of his father's face. "Thank you, no. We are here to inquire if this is the home of Ebenezer Karen, 17th Illinois Infantry, Army of Tennessee." "It is. This has been Eb's home since he was a lad of 10 or so." "Have you seen him lately?" "Why, no. Him and my son Thomas left together for the Army in August of '61. My own boy was killed at Pittsburgh Landing. We ain't heard from Eb but once since then." "You know the penalty for shielding a deserter from the United States Army?" "I do. Are you telling me that Eb is a deserter?" "His commanding officer has reason to believe that he has been making his way toward this part of the state. We assume toward his home." Matt lifted a shaking hand and covered his eyes. Jenny glanced at him anxiously and then suddenly blazed out at the questioner. "We haven't seen Eb. He's not here, and I'll thank you not to worry my father with more of this talk. If you want to look through this house," "We do, miss. This house and all other buildings around here." Jenny grasped the kerosene lamp with a firm hand. "Jeff, you come with me. We'll show these soldiers through the house. They can hunt outside for themselves." Her anger made Jenny a very grand lady, Jethro thought. He had never seen her more beautiful than she was that night, with her cheeks flaming and her eyes large and black, with mixed anger and fear. So remember that we're actually answering several of those questions here. Question 2, why did the federal registrars visit the Crichton's farm? Why are they here? What are they looking for? They tell you their reason. And then right here, we also get Jenny's response. So she's angry and outraged at the way that they've come in and treated, but there's even more. She's going to say more. The soldiers gained a little among themselves and followed her and Jethro to the sleeping rooms in the loft, then down to the kitchen and pantry, where Jenny took down the big key to the smokehouse and handed it to one of the men. We lock the smokehouse these nights. It's true there are deserters in these parts, and there's thieving around everywhere, but we're not shielding anyone. Go look in the smokehouse for yourselves. Go through the barn, the granary, everywhere you think someone might be hiding. After that, I could say, you'd best go down to Point Prospect Campground. The talk is that there are plenty of deserters there. The federal registrars looked uncomfortable. Yes, we've heard, one of them muttered. Jenny nodded. It is easier to come to a house and upset a sick old man and scared womenfolk. Nobody in this neighborhood thinks it's healthy to go down to Point Prospect, but you sounded so brave just now. I thought you might want to do your duty down there. Catch her attitude there. The man who had done the questioning bowed mockingly before Jenny. We'll see to our duty, miss, and if we find Ebenezer Karen on this place, we'll take him back with us. And maybe you, too. He turned toward Jethro. Will you get a lantern, young man, and light us out back? Jethro took down the lantern that hung on the outside wall of the kitchen and started down the path toward the barn. The federal registrars followed, laughing with one another. One of them fell into step with Jethro after a time. Is that girl your sister? Yes, sir. Well, she's quite a little beauty. Jethro did not answer. His silence seemed to provoke the young man. I said that your sister is quite a little beauty. Did you hear me? She spoke for, Jethro answered shortly. The young man shrugged and called out to the others, I've just come upon some very interesting information. The beautiful little Spitfire up at the ancestral mansion is spoke for. They laughed a great deal over that, and exaggerating the southern Illinois drawl and the backwoods diction, they made considerable sport over the boy's remark. Jethro felt his face burn with anger, but something new had been pointed up to him, something in the long process of learning to which he would be sensitive for the rest of his days. Until then, he had not thought of his speech as being subject to ridicule. The soldiers searched the place thoroughly and then started back to their wagon. One of them spoke sternly to Jethro on the way. If this man, Ebenezer Karen, turns up, you know what to do? No, sir. Then you'd better listen. You get word to the office of the federal registrars in Chicago right away, telling them where the man is or expects to be. You fail to report him, and you and your family will be up to your necks in trouble. Do you understand? Jethro nodded briefly. He was deeply antagonized by these men, but he knew they were simply carrying out a job assigned to them. Anyway, he was glad when the wagon carried them away to the north. Evidently, they were not going down to the deserters' camp at Point Prospect. Not that night, anyway. And since we have a break in the page there, we're going to pause the lesson here. You're able to answer the first 3 questions for chapter 9, and then we'll meet again tomorrow to continue reading chapter 9. Have a good day.